So the whole point of understanding riparian health is you want to analyze where you're at, because that helps you plan to where you want to go and what you might want to see in the future. So you watch the video, you can rewatch it obviously if you would like to and get a sense of that. And so the next step is to take one of our riparian health tools to sort of understand more. So the User's Guide to Health talks about it in kind of the same kind of general terms. That's the document on the right hand side. The two sort of documents on the left, if for those of you that have your video on, they can see me, are field workbooks or a coil bound book. Normally what we would be doing without COVID is we'd be taking you outdoors for a half a day and running through a health assessment. So you'd have a bit of a sense of how to actually do one. But given that we are in an online version, what we are suggesting, if you are maybe less comfortable, and because we can't give you as much obviously in-person instruction, we're suggesting instead you do one of our riparian health checklists. So there's the looking at your stream bank or looking at my lakeshore, depending what kind of water body you're looking at. So a lake, a wetland versus a stream or river. And it's pretty straightforward. It's yes and no answers. We do them with like grade 3s and grade 5s. So I'm more than confident that you guys can handle those. You can, if you wish, work through the Riparian Health Assessment Field Workbook, which is more detailed and has like the percentages and things like that, which were mentioned in the video. But again, because we can't give you the in-person instruction on that, that's kind of up to you. All of these resources are on the resource webpage. The sort of Riparian Health Checklist is a 2-pager, so you can easily print it off. Or even make notes in a notebook if you want to look at it on your phone as a PDF, and basically you tally up how many things you said yes to versus how many things you said no to get a health score. So you're going to use that, but first you're going to say, well, what riparian area am I interested in? And hopefully you've already kind of come to that conclusion and began sort of putting that into the first part of the workbook. Are you doing a wetland? Are you doing a stream? And again, just making sure that you're picking a riparian area as opposed to an upland. And determining the boundaries of your site is one of those things that we generally we want to pick maybe something that's representative of our whole site, or maybe we have a project area. In your case, you've decided that you're going to try something particular out. So that's where you're going to do a riparian health assessment or riparian health checklist. But you don't want to do a riparian health assessment or checklist that you lump 2 different management use together. So if you have, let's say, for those of you that have pasture land, you wouldn't do 2 pastures as one assessment or one checklist. You would do them separately because the management now as well as in the future might vary, and so you'd want to be using that information relative to the management that you're doing now or in the future. So if you have a fence line or a different management unit, you would do a separate assessment. And obviously, you want to pick a size of a site that's meaningful to what your plan is and doable. And again, you walk the whole area from kind of the water's edge out to the edge of that dry zone when it becomes upland plants. And again, along the lakeshore or wetland or stream, however long. We generally encourage you to at least do 200 meters if you have that size of property. On streams and rivers, that means you should be getting some inside and some outside bends, for instance. And then, of course, you're going to keep track of, take a picture of, or write down the checklist results that you get once you've walked that area. So as a reminder, don't include the aquatic zone. Obviously, some of you, when you're mapping it, it's much easier to map or draw because a creek itself is hard to take out. But don't include that in the actual assessment, just exclude the aquatic stuff when you're looking at it. And depending, you may only do one side. If it's a small water body, a small stream, you can easily cross. You'll want to do both sides, otherwise you may only look at one side at a time. We generally do both sides if it's crossable, and that means that if livestock or people can cross it with waitability, and you can drive around or whatever that might be. So look for any clues that might have changed your site to tell you if it's riparian or not, as I mentioned in my talk. And exclude, if you have a lake or wetland, also exclude those sort of aquatic zone areas, so open water, unless those open water patches have been created, such as on lake shores. We often see it where all the cattails or bulrushes have been cleared for a dock or have been cleared for boat launching or whatever. Those actually should be vegetated. Then you want to include those areas and note that they have lost their vegetation, but otherwise the sort of big cattail and marshy areas are part of your site, except for natural open water. And the other thing I would just suggest, in sites like this picture, you can see that it almost looks like a bit of a canal. It's very down cutter in size, so it eroded the bottom of the channel. And it might actually be quite narrow, as the sort of dashed lines show, but more often than not, people have a tendency to go far too narrow and think their riparian area is really only the banks or the very edge of the water body or very close, when in reality the riparian area is quite a lot further back in most cases. So again, you're going to do a checklist on a stream or maybe a lakeshore or wetland, and if you have a wetland, you would use the lakeshore one as it's meant for non-flowing water bodies versus the stream one. Very straightforward. 85% or more of the riparian area is covered with plants, yes, no, and so on down the list. You tally your score and come up with it. And I'm going to run through an example to sort of give you a sense of some thinking behind this. So this was a ranch that I visited in the last couple weeks in the foothills of southwestern Alberta, and they are looking at putting in a riparian pasture. They already have one adjacent. The photo on the left is sort of and the bottom is the sort of overview of the whole site. The picture on the top right is a fence line. On the left-hand side of the fence, they have created a riparian pasture many years ago, so it's fenced specifically to manage and grazing during specific times in the riparian area. So it is grazed, but very carefully. They want to do the same thing on the right. You can see that the willows are looking pretty mushroom-shaped. And so they decided they wanted to obviously improve that area and yet still keep grazing it or have the ability to graze in the future. So you're going to answer all the questions by walking the area that you've chosen and tally. In my example, I answered yes to 7 questions about bare ground and weeds and things like that, and no to 6, which takes me to healthy but with problems. So it's got some good things going for it, but it's also got some issues. And you'll see that what I did was on this sort of mock checklist, I wrote little notes for myself along each question to just add some additional information. So once you've done that, you're going to go to your workbook and you're going to record. The first question is, how healthy is it? So that's pretty straightforward, whatever you find out. And then you're going to, on page 8, say, or answer the question, what are your weaknesses? So what are the challenges of the site, or the maybe the unhealthy aspects that are preventing it from achieving your vision and obviously from being healthy? So in the site that I looked at, some of the areas are bare ground and erosion at water crossings, where the cattle are accessing for water and also going across the creek. And that's in those areas, lots of shallow rooted species like Kentucky bluegrass, dandelions, and clover are kind of spread along the rest of the site too. The willows are mostly old and mushroom shaped. And then of course, what in question 3, you're like, what's causing that? In this situation, it's a timing of grazing, perhaps letting the cows spend too much time in the riparian area because it's a really large pasture that includes a huge foothill. You can just kind of see that in the background of this picture, and up to the right, it climbs, several hundreds of meters. It deters the cattle from going upland because it's a lot of extra work and they don't need to. So it's not that there's overgrazing in the rest of the site, but in the riparian area there may be. And so then the other thing you're going to move on to is, those are the kind of the challenges or the issues with the site and riparian health. You want to talk about then on page 9 in question 4, what are the strengths that are helping you or going to help you achieve the vision? So what are the ecological assets that you do have? On the whole, the site has really good plant cover. There's not that much bare ground except at those small crossing areas. It doesn't actually have many weeds. The channel is still relatively deep and narrow with clean, clear water. There's no artificial bank stabilization like riprap or rocks being tossed in to hold the banks together. And there are a lot of willows left, even though there's not many young ones, but there's still lots left. So those are all positives that are going to help them bring back the health of the site. And then the related questions, well, what's happening at the site now? What's the management or the human activity that's contributing on your site to the strengths? So it can be right in the riparian area, it can be adjacent, and it can also be upstream, because sometimes those things are influencing what's happening in the riparian area. So at this example site, it's about the right amount of grazing most of the time, and weed control they're really on top of weed control to keep it under well managed amounts. So those are really positives. And so understanding what's going well and what some of your issues are key for these sort of analyzing your current situation. And then you're going to move on to those are kind of the ecological and the management things that are related to health and condition of the site. Then you're going to move on to page 10, which is listing other assets that are strengths. So they might not be really obvious at first, but think about things like, I have a whole family of people want to help me do something, pick weeds, or I have a lot of neighbors who want to work together on weed management. So I have access to a grant that's going to help me put in some off-site watering system or electric fencing, for instance. They already have some of the materials on hand, like the electric fencing unit. In this case, it's a really large pasture unit, so they have lots of flexibility to cut it into more than one piece and still make them grazable units. And so that's, and graze them at times, it gives them more flexibility, because one will be a riparian focused pasture and the other one would be an upland pasture. So those are some of the things. You might have time or money, labor, all of those things, whatever is needed, or maybe it's existing materials to help you achieve your vision that you already have is a great thing. Maybe it's enthusiasm, energy, because you're young. Those could be what you have on hand, or you're wise and older, even if you have less energy. So you're going to do that and fill in that current situation for your place. And of course, every riparian area is different. All of you have different goals. All of you have different riparian areas. And each of your riparian areas, even because many of you have multiple places, will also be different. So focus on, kind of getting a good handle on one for the purposes of working through the workbook. But if you have time and opportunity, of course, feel free to do multiple of them, to work through the whole activity with multiple if you have that time.